I wish someone taught me how to do business strategy, but no one did. So I spent thousands of hours learning how to do this on my own so you don't have to. Let me show you how this goes down. I'm gonna draw out the exact model that I've used over and over again to scale companies. I'm gonna do it piece by piece so you can follow along with some surprises along the way. In the top box, we have the strategic problem. This is the first step in defining a really good strategy. Now, here's the deal. There's a business approach to strategy and a scientific approach to strategy. The reason why I stay away from the business approach to strategy is because there's so many different frameworks out there, and there's always the flavor of the day. You have mission, vision, values, you have SWOT analysis, 7 S's, the 5 P's, you have EOS. There are all these frameworks that try to teach strategy, but they're incomplete. They don't really move the needle. So I'm gonna show you a better approach. I like to follow the scientific approach, and if you think about it, in the scientific approach, you start with a problem, all right? So you have a problem you're trying to solve, and then you create a hypothesis on how to solve the problem, you run some experiments, and that's essentially what we're doing here. Okay, so it starts with the strategic problem. This is the number one constraint, the number one obstacle that's getting in the way and preventing the company to achieve its desired results. So here you have a business owner, and the business owner wants to be over here, and this is my pathetic palm tree. Does that even look like a palm tree? I don't know. But you have a palm tree here, and maybe you have what, like a pot of gold, and maybe like a lounge chair. There you go. And so the owner wants to get to this dream outcome. Now, he or she may be alone, or maybe they have a team with them. And so they form this company, and they're like, all right, let's get over here to this dream outcome. But guess what? There are all these obstacles that stand in the way. This is the strategic problem. If you noticed, I didn't draw all these obstacles here, all these problems, even though in business sometimes it could feel like that. You have a lot of problems that you're facing, but instead I just drew one pillar, one wall. This is the one problem standing in your way from getting to here, and you have to name it to claim it, and you have to solve it so you can get here. But guess what? The reality is once you solve this problem, another one pops up, and you get a little bit closer, and then another problem pops up, and that's how strategy is iterative. Nonetheless, you have to define what is the number one problem constraining the business. We spend so much time with companies here at this point because guess what? If you don't define what the problem is, you're gonna build a strategy based on the wrong problem. I was recently at a workshop with another company. I wasn't facilitating it, but nonetheless, I was in the workshop and I was trying to keep my mouth closed. And the facilitator's like, all right, so we're gonna draw out the organization chart and we're gonna start assigning responsibilities, blah, 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 right? And the whole team's like, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that. And then after they got through this exercise, which took several hours, total waste of time, they started listing out what are all the priorities that we're gonna focus on this year. And they listed out like 30. And I was like, oh my gosh, how the heck are you ever gonna stay focused? And then they whittled it down and they're like, okay, these are the top 5. We're gonna go tackle these. And I just sat there, my mouth shut, which is hard to do sometimes. And I was just thinking, here you are trying to design the organization. You're listing out all these things to go do, but you don't even know, and you haven't even defined what the problem is. So how can you go commit to all this action when you don't even know what the problem is that you're trying to solve? That's why when it comes to strategy, you have to start here. What is the number one problem in your business that you're trying to solve? And the problem that you're trying to solve is not related to a customer's order. It's something bigger. It's more macro. And one way to get to this is just ask why 5 times. And isn't it funny that why is like such a controversial word, and it could create a lot of contention with people because like, why? Think about a kid. You're like, you're going to bed at 9. And they're like, why? You're like, because I said so. Why? Because I'm your dad. Why? Right? That's how my kids do it, at least. So when you ask why 5 times, and maybe it's not 5 times exactly, but when you ask it over and over again, that's how you're going to uncover your real strategic problem. So you're like, look, our strategic problem is we're struggling with cash flow. Okay. So you think it's cash. Cool. Why are you struggling with cash flow? Well, we're struggling with cash flow because our revenue's dropping. Okay, so revenue's declining. Why? Well, because we're not getting enough leads. Okay, why aren't you getting enough leads? And you keep going down the line until you figure out, look, our offer is weak. People don't even understand what it is. We don't have a strong funnel. We don't have a good lead gen engine, whatever it is. But that's how you uncover what your strategic problem is. And that's why I love spending so much time on this first phase, because if you nail this, everything else is going to flow from it. Cool? You got this? You got this. You totally got this. See, strategy doesn't have to be this complicated black box. Instead, it's quite simple. Here's the rest of the framework, but with a lot of missing pieces. In the center here, okay, see this circle? We have the customer. I'll draw a little picture of a customer. Here's the customer with their arms out, if you can't tell what that is. But I always like to put the customer at the very center of the framework, because if you try to build a strategy based on what you want to do, then you're going to be making a lot of mistakes. I was at this conference once with this client, and they had their entire executive team there. And all day, the executives would come up and they'd present their plan for the year. And when we got to the end of the day, I was thinking, wow, I don't think one executive got up here and mentioned the customer. It's like the customer is completely absent. And I don't think that's isolated to that one company. I think a lot of businesses, when they're doing strategy work, they immediately get into like, me. This is what I want. This is what we want. This is how we see things going, instead of focusing on the customer. So if you begin with the customer in mind, it's going to be super critical. And this is where you get into identifying your ICP, your ideal customer profile. Now, I'm not going to spend too much time on the ICP because it's a beast in itself. In fact, we cover it in our sales marketing playbook. We have an entire section devoted just to developing your ICP. So let's just keep this at a really high level. What I'm trying to drive home here, though, is at the core of your strategy, you have to define one ICP. Notice I didn't put an S on here, ICPs. And for some businesses, it's such a temptation to think of all these different customer profiles, different avatars, whatever you want to call them. But I would encourage you to just focus your strategy on solving one ICP's problems with your business, okay? Because like I said, when you go more broad, it just introduces way more complexity. All right, we're now ready to get into the next part of the framework. So I'll draw another box and write shared aspiration. Okay, so we have our strategic problem, the number one constraint in the business. We have our ICP in the center. Now we need to get into what does winning look like for your business. Now, here's a pro tip. When it comes to winning, you have to introduce and invite everybody into this aspiration. That's why I call it shared, because when you include your ICP, your employees, your vendors, your investors, the community, all the stakeholders that your business influences, and when you bring them all into this winning vision, that's where you develop a really strong strategy. So you have to be very clear on what does winning look like. Another pro tip for you is when it comes to your shared aspiration, you don't want to define winning necessarily in terms of money. So let me explain. Some companies fall into the trap of saying, look, winning for us means being a $100 million company with 20% margins. Now, look, that's not a bad aspiration, but a good strategy drives financial results. In other words, the money will come as a result of a good strategy, not the other way around. So don't get those confused. So instead, get really clear on what does winning look like. Do you want to grow the business? Do you want to sell the business one day? How do you want things to transpire moving into the future? So get crystal clear on this and be very, very specific. You don't want to be vague. You don't want to use all these platitudes, and you don't want this to be super aspirational, even though it has the word aspiration in it. Just clarity is very important at this stage. Okay, moving on into the next box, we have market, focus, and position. Seems like a lot of fancy words, right? It's really simple though. This is essentially defining where your company is going to compete. And it may include things like geographies. I'm just going to abbreviate here. It may include products, services. It may include industries, stage of production, etc. So I'm going to explain each of these in a little bit more detail so you know how to apply this to your business. Think about it like this. If I'm going to go buy a house and I'm looking around with a realtor, when it comes to market focus and position, I want to buy a house in a neighborhood, and this is for me, that's near my kid's school, right? So you have school here. And I want it to be within a certain time frame, like 15 minutes or less for a commute. I want it to be a good school. I want a neighborhood with big mature trees, etc. And so all these decisions about where to buy the house is going to position my business for success in the future. Because if you position your company incorrectly, in other words, in the wrong industry or the wrong geography, it's really, really hard to win. Even the best strategy is going to be difficult to roll out if you're in some remote town in the middle of Kansas, for example, right? If you don't have the right customer base and you're not serving the right ICP because they're not there. Think about Walgreens and CVS. Where are those stores located? They're always on the corner of really busy intersections, right? And with real estate, location, location, location is what matters. This is the same thing that I'm talking about as far as positioning goes. When I had my landscape business, I was stuck at $1 million a year, okay? Here I was 16 years old. I started my company. I didn't know what I was doing. I grew it to $1 million and then I just hit this plateau. We weren't growing. We weren't finding the right customers and I was just so frustrated. But then I redid my strategy and I realized we need to position ourselves differently. We need to get in front of builders, architects, interior designers, all the players who are doing high-end work because I wanted to position my company in that high-end market because that's where our ICP was. Customers that were willing to spend more than $100,000 on their landscaping. So when we repositioned our company and we got really clear on our market focus and position, everything changed, right? So that's really, really critical. So that's what you're gonna do here is you're gonna define, okay, what geographies are you gonna compete in? Is it gonna be on a local level? Is it on a state level? Are you gonna compete in the Midwest, the Northeast, in the United States only, or are you gonna go internationally? What is it? When it comes to geography, define that. What are the products and services that you're gonna go after to serve this ICP? Remember, you're always going back to the ICP. Think about the industries you're gonna serve, and then the stage of production is essentially where are you gonna start? Are you gonna get raw materials and produce your product from raw materials, or are you gonna have somebody else produce it and you're just gonna like white label it? Like, that's stage of production right here. So all those things you have to consider, and all of that is a part of market focus and position. Okay, let's move on. The next box right here includes competitive behavior. All right, that's just another way of saying, how is your company going to compete? So check this out. According to Michael Porter, there are 3 generic strategies. The first one is cost leadership, and I'll explain these in more detail. The next one is differentiation. I'm going to abbreviate it because I can't spell it. I'm just kidding. It is a long word though. And then the last one includes focus or being in a niche. Some people are like niche. Is it niche, niche? But I'm like, the riches are in the niches. So it'd be weird to say the riches are in the niches. I don't know, you can say whatever you want. But that's the last one, focus. Okay, so let's get into each of these. Let's start with cost leadership. Think about Walmart or Amazon. They have streamlined operations. They're very efficient. They have robotics. They invest in automation. They outsource stuff. They have economies of scale. You get the point. But their cost structure is super low, and therefore they can offer low prices or lower prices compared to their competitors and still make the same amount of margin. And so when it comes to cost leadership, a lot of people are like, whoa, no. We do not want to be the cheapest. And I'm like, cost leadership has nothing to do with being the cheapest as far as pricing goes. It has everything to do with your cost structure. So how much does it cost you to to fulfill your product or service, to get it into the hands of customers. All right, so that's cost leadership here, a very powerful strategy, and it's one of the 3 generic strategies, according to Michael Porter. The next one is differentiation. So think about Chanel, think about Prada, right? These businesses here that are different from all their competitors. So they differentiate, and therefore they're able to get premium pricing because they're different. You can't find it anywhere else. And that's why some people are willing to spend a lot of money on like a Louis Vuitton purse compared to one that you just get at Walmart, right? So that's differentiation. The last one is focus, which can be a blend of cost leadership and differentiation, but really it comes down to being in a niche, getting really, really narrow with your ICP, and then solving their problems better than anybody else, right? So those are the 3 generic strategies that get into competitive behavior. So when I'm working with a company, first I have them define which generic strategy they want to pursue, but that's not all. I wish it was. That'd be super simple and easy, right? But once you get into that, you have to start defining your overall business model. For example, that includes having your offer, right? So you have this offer in your business. And you say, okay, this is our core offer that we are going to sell to our customers. And then you have to define what are the economics of that core offer. So for example, we're going to charge $500. Okay, great. Now, how much does it cost to get a customer and fulfill that customer in the first 30 days? And you may say, okay, well, that is $1,500. That is not great. That's sad face because you're only getting $500 and it's costing you $1,500. And you will burn through a lot of cash if this is the model you're going to pursue. This is just one example, but ultimately we go through the business and we define everything starting with the core offer, the funnel, everything, how the whole operating model works. Like I said, we cover that in the playbook. That's a whole other conversation in itself. Then we get into operations and we look at all the activities. These are activities, if you didn't know that, just kidding. We look at all the activities that the company is performing, that they're engaging in, and we look for ones that are outsiders. We're like, why are you guys doing this? Why are you pulling this report? Why are you doing this process over here? It adds no value to the company or to the customer. Okay, we need to eliminate that, right? So we get into the DNA of the business and we see how are they fulfilling their products and services. So like I said, we look at the offer, we look at the funnel, we look at the operating model. We do all that so the company can get really clear on how it's going to compete. Once we do that, we move to the next box, which includes resources and returns. Sorry for my handwriting there. That's terrible. It's like going into the ICP. It's okay. Resources and returns is a really critical step. And this is where a lot of people, they just don't do it, right? But what this includes is saying, okay, we have our shared aspiration. This is what winning looks like. Here's our market and our focus. Here's the competitive behavior that's going to allow us to win. Then when you get over here, you have to say, okay, well, what resources do we need in order to execute the strategy? So you may say, okay, we need to hire an excellent business development and sales and marketing team. Okay, cool. That's one resource. What else? Oh, we need to integrate AI into our business. That needs to be a core capability. Okay, great. What else? Oh, we need our own tech stack. So we need our own technology, our own app. Okay, great. What else? And you list out all the resources that the business needs. And then, and you'll love this if you're a nerd like me, you build a financial model. And this is where strategy and finance come together. And we will build out a financial model. And we're looking at cash flow over the next 5 years and into the future. And then we figure out the valuation of the business based on this strategic option here that the company is considering. At the end of the day, we want to see a few things like cash flow, right? Because we want to make sure that the company actually has enough money to execute on this strategy, to hire all those people, to implement that technology, et cetera. And we want to make sure that the return on invested capital, ROIC, is enough to justify going down this path. So this is the framework that we use over and over again, but check this out. See this box right here? I'm going to use my green marker. this box right here is actually a piece of multiple boxes. In other words, if we zoom out here, this is what it really looks like. Boom. Boom. And these are called my strategic options. So I'm doing this, everything in this green box here, I'm doing this multiple times to solve this one strategic problem. You'll notice the strategic problem doesn't change multiple times. We're not trying to solve like 3 different problems. That'd create a lot of complexity. It's one problem with multiple options to solve that problem. So I'm just going through this multiple times based on the options I want to pursue. Now you may be wondering, what are the options? One option, for example, may be to do an M&A strategy. So we may say, we want to solve this problem by going out there and buying a bunch of companies and then rolling them up into one big entity. Okay, that's one option. The other option is we may want to partner with another company and do a joint venture. Okay, that's another great option. And another option may include we want to grow organically and scale this thing and then sell it one day. All right, so I'm just making these options up. But as we go through this framework for each option, we will then run it through the last piece, which includes D, P, and E. The D stands for desirable, P stands for practical, and E stands for economical. So you have these 3 options, you ran it through this framework, you have the ICP at the center, right? And you're trying to solve this strategic problem. You ask yourself first, let's go with this option, this first option. We say, is it desirable? Yeah, very desirable. We want to do M&A. We want to go buy a bunch of companies. Is it practical? We've never really done it before, but we could probably hire the right people. Okay, so this is kind of like question mark here. This is like check. And then, is it economical? Dang, we have no cash flow. We don't have capital. We don't have access to capital. So this is big X mark. So this option may not be viable. So you do that over and over again. So let's just go through the JV. Is it desirable? I don't know. If we partner with them, maybe they steal our stuff. Question mark there. Is it practical? I don't know. Is it economical? Yes. Okay, option 2 doesn't look super great. And then this third one is it desirable? Yes. Is it practical? Yes. Do we have the resources? Yes. You may say, ding, ding, ding. That is the winning option. But you're not done yet. Okay. What you have to do is then you have to go out into the real world and you have to run tests. So just test this out. Don't bet the entire farm on one strategy session with your team. Okay. Look at your options and then go out there and try it. So maybe you have an ICP in mind and you have a market that you want to try to get into and you want to focus on a certain market and you have your competitive behavior and all this stuff. Go out there and try it. Go try and get some leads. Try to make your offer and see if you can make money by doing this option. And you'll learn along the way whether or not it works. Another way to look at it is you have your intended strategy and your emergent strategy. This is your intended strategy that you come up with your team, you draw it out on the whiteboard, and then you go out there and execute, and then guess what? An emergent strategy comes to pass. So this is the framework for how to design a strategy, but what's missing is a playbook for how to actually execute it. And I'll show you how to do that in future videos. Cheers.